Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CantoSense. We're so glad that you're with us, where we are embracing Chinese culture for Christian living. Today, we'd like to talk about leadership, Western leadership versus Eastern leadership. There's clearly pros and cons to both. But now we want to add in that third element. What about biblical leadership? And when we see how Chinese leaders are playing out in the East, how can we maybe redeem some of those weaknesses or nuances?
Especially in our globalized world, a lot more Asian and specifically Chinese leaders are at the helm of multinational companies, international organizations. And it would be interesting for us to find out a little bit more. Has there been adaptation? What are the challenges and opportunities?
So we are so excited to have one of our returning guests who is in a position of leadership to join us today to talk about this important and big topic. Well, we want to give a warm CantoSense welcome again to Lawrence Tong, who's joining us as our special guest. He's the CEO of Operation Mobilisation. Welcome back, Lawrence.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. My journey with OM started in 1974 when I first visited one of their ships, the Logos, that came to Singapore. And what captured me was that I saw young men and women totally sold for Jesus. And so they forsook all and joined this movement. So 3 years later, in 1978, I joined OM. And I've been with them now for 43 years.
Wow.
My leadership journey included being the country leader for the work in Taiwan. And then I was asked to be the Logos 2 director, the first time that they gave this to an Asian. So that was quite groundbreaking. And later on, I was leading the work of OM in China. And after that, it was this role. I've been in this role now for 8 years.
Now you are the first Asian international director for Operation Mobilisation. So we really want to talk about Chinese or Asian leadership because it's commonly believed that Asian, and specifically Chinese for our purpose, our style of leadership is more hierarchical with greater power distance, whereas the Western approach is more egalitarian and inclusive in that sense of the word. How would you describe your leadership style?
My leadership approach has changed over the years or evolves as I mature. Today, my leadership style has been described by other people as polycentric leadership, where I gather people together, empower them, spread them out, and let them lead together with me. When it comes to decision making, I prefer, my leaders are consulted before I make the decisions. I lean towards a communal approach. When I speak, I make sure that I check with my leaders, my colleagues before I speak, so that when I speak on behalf of the group and not as an individual. When it comes to my personal decisions, then I make that decisions as an individual. But when it comes to group decisions, I want to make sure that my leadership team is consulted. I often ask the question, what is Jesus' leadership style? And I think Jesus is both authoritarian and egalitarian. Jesus was absolute when it comes to biblical truth. He does not compromise. And he even said, all authority has been given to me. And that is very authoritarian. And that is the truth. But then when it comes to relationship, interacting with his people, his disciples, with the public, I find him to be very egalitarian, very approachable. So there's both. And I want to learn to be that way.
You talked about making decisions communally. How is that different from consensus?
It's quite different. I want to make sure that my leaders have an opportunity to agree or disagree with me before the decision is made. But the ultimate decision comes from me. I'm not waiting for 100% agreement before we move ahead. In a group so big and so diverse, there will always be people who disagree or people who cannot totally accept your decision, and that is fine. It's not bad. They're not enemies or anything. They just have differing views. So space is needed to talk about this for discussions. But as the leader of the group, when the decision is made, it has to be my responsibility.
So there is a voice, but not necessarily vote for the people. The previous two international directors were from the West, one American and another one British. And here you are, Singaporean Chinese, becoming the leader of such a diverse organization. What sort of adaptation have you needed to make when you took on the role?
I want to begin by saying that both George and Peter have left a tremendous legacy. OM was in good shape, it was well placed. And so that part is not difficult for me to assume. Now, OM is Eurocentric. A lot of policies, practices, legacies of the past were very Western style and Western structured. Now, I have grown up in OM, so I'm used to those approach and used to those styles. So it doesn't mean it's bad. It simply means there's a lot of adjustment on my part. I had a strong mandate because when I was appointed, I was working with a group of leaders who were predominantly Western. A week before, they were my leaders, and now I'm their leader. So that was a big adjustment. A lot of it is give and take, and I have to fight certain prejudices because of the typical image people have of Chinese leaders. In the beginning stage of my leadership, I have to earn the trust of these people before I started implementing some changes.
In some leadership style, trust is earned. In the Asian leadership approach, is trust comes with the role, right? If you're a leader, you are naturally trusted. And you say you still very much hold on to Chinese values. Has that been frustrating for you, just working through and navigating this very different way of looking at trust?
It's not so much frustrations that I go through, but it's an up and down journey. Sometimes you make headways and sometimes you thought, oh my, I've got to start all over again. I believe for the rest of the movement, they were also adjusting to my style.
What advice would you have for a younger generation coming up in Christian leadership?
I would focus a lot of my time on watching and learning from those who have gone before me. One of the authors from a leadership book that says that 89% of your leadership skill is learned through observation. And I think it is very true. As you observe the leaders, how they solve problems, how they handle stress, how they cope with criticism and all this, those are valuable things that you can learn and glean from them and apply it into your life. I would read books, although the key thing that sustained me is going back again to biblical truth. A verse that comes to mind is from Psalm 32, verse 8. It says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will guide you with my eye. Leaning back on the Lord and hearing from him, spending time with him is a key way of sustaining a leadership function. Many leaders focus on the external performance, like I want to do a good job, I want to show results and all this.
Yeah.
I would encourage the younger leaders to also nurture the inner self. And one of the ways I prevent myself from being too cynical with the things I see and hear is going back to my alone time with God and praying, seeking him. And that spiritual formation has helped me to look at things differently. And then my perspective changed. And sometimes in my low moments, I want to give up everything. And then after having spent time praying and repenting of my attitude and all this, I came out of this, moment feeling encouraged and energized to press on for one more day.
Yeah. And God says, you're not done yet.
That's the scary part.
No, that's great advice. Thank you.
Is that truly one biblical approach, considering we will always unconsciously lead from who we are, which includes our cultural defaults?
Different situations call for different style of leadership. David was a very effective king when it comes to a warring era of Israel.
Yeah.
But when he was idle, he got into some mischief. The beauty of it all is that God used different people for different seasons. You said it right, I Ching. We got to lead out of who we are. And everything that God has invested to us, even before we came to know him, will be called into services for what he wants to do with us. As leaders as well, we must recognize the strength of other people. There is no one particular style that is the best. Some of my colleagues want to think that way, but I differ. I think there are a lot of strength. We can learn from the Latins, we can learn from the Africans, we can learn from the Europeans, we can also learn from the Chinese and the Indians. And that is the beauty of all this diverse culture that God has created in every ethnic group. When it comes to disagreement, the Bible has the ultimate authority. We have to submit our disagreement to biblical truths. Many times, ego prevents us from moving forward.
Even looking at the life of Jesus, he was very situational in the way he leads.
There are 93 nations represented in OM. We can't say that the Asian way is better than the 92 simply because I'm now in charge. So I think we also have to lead with humility and acknowledging, recognizing that those people also have a lot to contribute.
Yeah.
And then if we see the good in these people, then things will be very different.
It is redeeming the strengths of these different styles of leadership for the kingdom.
For those of us who come from colonial past, we must see that we are also created equally in the eyes of God. I just want to share a verse from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. Again, this verse supersedes all other styles. So God's way above our ways.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for being with us again. I hope it's been encouraging for our listeners, especially those of us in leadership, that there's much to take away. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.